Emergency services have retrieved the bodies of 3 flood victims at Cato Crest in Mayville, Durban. The victims are believed to have been swept away by a swollen river after heavy rains and strong winds battered the city and other parts of the province yesterday. The Inanda area was hit by strong winds, which many described as a tornado. Emergency services reported treating scores of injured people. There were also dramatic rescues of people trapped in their cars. Parts of the province have been receiving heavy rainfall since Monday, with damaging flooding. Professor Hope Hangwelani Magidimisha-Chipungu, who is a lecturer in the town and regional planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, now joins us via our Zoom link to talk more about this issue. Hope, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. Now, one would ask that when it comes to dealing with storms of this nature, how prepared is the KwaZulu-Natal province?
Good evening, and good evening to all your viewers. It's a very difficult question that you're asking as to how prepared they are. But one can only speak to what they can see on the ground and what is going on. And unlike the previous time, this time around, I think the alert coming from the city together with the climate experts had come out early, so they were quite expecting that there will be some heavy rainfalls coming up a day before or a couple of days before. But also the way in which they've responded this time around in terms of going to the areas where people are affected, they were fast and prompt, and they were there on almost in time. As to how prepared we are in terms of responding versus preparedness in terms of preparing for the disaster as a whole, something that maybe we may want to have a discussion around.
When you look at the structural damage which is currently being experienced in the KwaZulu-Natal province, when it comes to how one should be dealing with such structural issues, I'm sure if you can just tally, the devastation that has rocked that region, just take us through that, especially in terms of the structural damage done on the KwaZulu-Natal province.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting point you're making in terms of the structures in place, and this talks about the kind of housing environment that we're talking about and the quality thereof of the housing, and whether they were ready and designed in a way that they're able to withstand the pressure of tornado, as it's reported widely that it is a tornado. But the question is, do we have a good housing which observe what we call building code standard in as far as housing is concerned? And if you look at the areas which is hit most in Inanda, actually some of those houses, they actually don't conform with what we call building codes and the way they are located. So the materials used, the process in which they go through when building their houses is not something which has been vetted by an expert and given a go ahead. It's just some of the people were trying to survive, and they have to put a house together with the legal resources that they have. But we have not given sufficient time to try to actually understand the type of the infrastructure that we have, the type of the structure that we have, and that is where the issue is to say the houses that are being affected, to what extent those houses meet the building code standard that we have, and some of them to say is to do with the maintenance in the long run. So the infrastructure on the road, how that infrastructure has been maintained over a period of time. And those are the questions that maybe we need to be asking ourselves: to what extent has that been done? And to what extent people are being aware of their environment? We cannot run away from the fact that natural hazard will always happen. But poor housing environment, lack of better service delivery, necessitate that, and it leads that into more disaster. So we're not saying we are not going to have hazards, but we want to say, how prepared are we? And that's a discussion we should be having as a country, and not just in KwaZulu-Natal in a way, also as a country, to say, are we prepared for any disaster? What what are we supposed to do? Do the people know what needs to be done at a local level? What are the individual action one has to do when they're confronted with a situation like this? What do we need to do mutually? So my neighbor is experiencing something like this. What am I supposed to do? How do I support and assist my neighbor? And what is the public action that we need to do? And then unfortunately, KZN is more like an example setter because it's experiencing all this. But we can all agree that informal settlements are across the country, and should anything happen to other provinces, we're most likely going to see the same thing. So we need to be having this discussion as a country to say, how do we deal with this, and how do we better prepare ourselves, and how do we better plan our cities in a way that we actually avoid wasting people's life through this, and something that we can prevent.
And Prof, you speak a lot about the quality of the homes that are being built in areas, especially in the KwaZulu-Natal province, as we are dealing with that at the moment. You know, when you look at the quality of homes and when you look at town planning, would you say that this was taken into consideration when a number of these areas were being built?
It's very hard to say, because I've not looked at the development scheme of Inanda in greater details. But as that may be, it's quite an obvious thing that if we are talking about houses which are informal settlement, I do not think that's what we are planning as town planners, and that's what we're encouraging. But of course, the circumstances behind and beyond people kind of lead them into that kind of way to say, we want a stake in the city, we want to be within an urban environment, and we're going to do everything to make sure that we solicit our stay here, and we stay here, we become part of the cities, because this is a survival strategy in the long run. But as to whether that was a planning issue and that was considered, it's a difficult thing to say. But what we do know is that it not in any way in our planning system where we talk about informal settlement and where we talk about schemes which are not vetted, and as I've explained earlier on.
And Prof, of course, as many pick up the pieces and try to rebuild their lives in this region, what would you say, the solutions should be here so that they don't encounter such natural disasters, but, possible solutions here that don't require for many of these residents to be relocated?
Yeah, solutions they come in different forms and nature, and the one what comes to mind right now is that we need to intensify our awareness. We need to let people know that natural hazards are real, and they can happen in any time. Nobody can know with accuracy that tomorrow we're going to have tornado or we won't have tornado. But what is important is that we have to raise awareness, and lack of awareness that we have in the country, it means lack of action. So which means we do not have, and we're not taking actions in terms of the awareness. That's the first thing that people need to be made aware. The second one is to do in terms of the education and how do we build our houses. This is very important. In as much as we want a stake within the urban environment, we want to survive within the urban environment, we need to ask ourselves serious questions as a country to say, how are we dealing with the issues around the building codes, right? How are we enforcing that as a country? Are we enforcing that? And what are the incentives? What strategies do we have to enforce that? Because as it is, there's a lack of enforcement in terms of building codes to say, in order for you to have a solid structure which can resist a climate change, which can resist a disaster, this is how it looks like. We are not, we may have standards somewhere else sitting in a document, but we're not implementing that as a country. And I think that is one thing that we also need to look at. The other thing that we need to look at is the resilience and sustenance of our infrastructure. Once we put infrastructure in place, it's important to ensure that we maintain our infrastructure. We make sure that we collect those rubbles, to collect those waste, solid waste in different places, so that we do not block our drainage system. So when the rains come, we don't have to worry about that. That should not be our worry, that the water is not moving. We shouldn't be discussing that. We should be discussing that we have a lot of rain coming, but not that we have a drainage system which is not working. So how do we then design cities which is risk-informed, but also cities which are risk-informed, but also which are able to respond accordingly to the pressure that we are expecting? The history should tell us over a period of years right now to say this is how certain provinces are responding in terms of the climate change, and this is what we're expecting.
Right.
So what are the risk management? And we also have to focus on prevention to say, do we have to wait for people to die in order for us to come up with solutions? And we need to invest on that.
All right, then, Professor Hope Magidimisha, thank you so much for your time. That is Professor Hope Magidimisha-Chipungu, who is a lecturer in town and regional planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.